I sensed something was wrong the moment I stepped into the lobby, and the receptionist avoided my eyes. And I mean completely avoided them, as if her gaze was fixed to a crack in the marble floor. I hadn't even put my purse down when an Outlook notification pinged on my phone. Urgent performance review. 9:15 a.m., Conf RM4C. The subject line was in all caps. No body text. No signature. Impressive. For context, I had just completed 12 straight quarters of growth. 12. We had secured the Hastings account 3 weeks earlier, projected at $28 million in revenue over the next 3 years. I built that deal from a rough sketch on a Delta flight, and now I was being summoned to a last-minute meeting like I'd broken a minor office rule. When you've worked in finance long enough, you develop a sixth sense. A quiet warning in your spine when trouble is approaching. Mine was loud that morning. Karen's door was slightly open as I walked by. She was whispering to someone in that artificial sympathetic tone she uses when terminating interns. The same tone she used when she told Jenny from accounting that her role had evolved beyond her scope, which is corporate language for handing your job to someone cheaper and better connected. I took the longer route to the meeting room. Not out of fear, out of strategy. I needed a moment to breathe, observe, and see who was avoiding me. A few guilty glances confirmed my suspicion. One associate I had mentored for 5 years slipped into the copy room the moment he saw me. That was confirmation enough. I stepped into my office and opened the locked drawer. Inside was my original contract. 8 pages of legal language, 3 of which I had renegotiated after Q4 last year. I turned to Clause 11C, read it carefully. Then again, my finger traced the initials, Karen's, Brian's, and mine. Still there. My parachute, my safeguard, my protection against exactly the type of miscalculation I was about to walk into. I folded the document, placed it in my leather portfolio, stood up, adjusted my jacket, and allowed myself one composed smile in the mirror before heading out. If you're still here and curious how this decision became the most expensive and publicly irreversible mistake they ever made, consider subscribing. Maybe even leave a like. Some corporate lessons deserve documentation. Back in the hallway, I passed the large mural the CEO commissioned after our Series D funding closed. A dramatic display of innovation. Notably absent were the women who actually secured the deal. Instead, stock photo models in VR headsets filled the wall. Appropriate symbolism. Conference room 4C had its blinds drawn. Karen sat stiffly inside with 2 HR representatives who looked deeply uncomfortable. There were no laptops, no reports, no water, no performance review, just a predetermined outcome. Victoria, Karen began, wearing an expression that attempted empathy. Thank you for joining on such short notice. Of course, I replied. I always make time for my team. No one reacted. She gestured toward the chair. I remained standing. A single sheet of paper lay in front of her. I was confident it was my termination notice. Karen cleared her throat. We're restructuring. Unfortunately, your position is being eliminated effective immediately. This decision is final and has been approved by leadership. Leadership, meaning Brian, who hadn't even shown up. I nodded. No tears, no objections, just a measured breath. Understood. Karen blinked, clearly expecting resistance. She misjudged me. I'll need your badge, she added, almost apologetically. I handed it over with a polite smile. Just like that, I was no longer an executive at Archer Financial. Except that wasn't entirely accurate. What Karen failed to consider, what none of them considered, was timing. Terminating me one day before my bonus vested didn't eliminate the payout. It activated Clause 11C, which meant they didn't simply owe me $4 million. They owed double plus damages. They would realize that soon enough. I exited conference room 4C as calmly as if I were heading to lunch. Karen stayed behind, likely aware something felt incomplete. HR remained seated, expressionless. I walked past my office without looking in. They could pack my belongings or store them away. It didn't matter. That's how corporate systems operate. You don't build empires. You're contracted by them and replace the moment your value exceeds your compliance. What Karen and especially Brian never understood was that I never operated solely under their rules. I allowed them to assume I did. Instead of heading to the parking garage, I accessed the executive elevator and selected floor 45, legal and compliance. I had spent enough time there during the Hastings deal to know who still possessed independent judgment behind the non-disclosure agreements. The receptionist glanced up briefly before I placed my leather folder on her desk. "Please tell Aaron Patel I'm here," I said. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "I was just terminated," I replied evenly. "He'll want to see me." Aaron was assistant counsel. Intelligent, detail-oriented, he once asked whether he should leave for the private sector or remain in corporate. I advised him to stay long enough to understand where the risks were and who created them. 10 minutes later, I was in his office. He closed the door and studied me carefully. "Are you okay?" he asked. "They terminated me, effective immediately. No cause cited, standard severance, no mention of the incentive clause." "Which clause?" I opened the folder and handed him the page. Clause 11C, paragraph 3, subsection A. He read it once, then again, more slowly. His expression stayed neutral, but his focus sharpened. "Did you add this during your Q4 renegotiation?" They initialed every page. Brian even asked about the multiplier language. I explained it covered transitional risk if I departed. He approved it. Aaron leaned back slightly. "This is airtight. If they terminated you within 24 hours of vesting, they owe the full bonus, plus 50% of your final year's base salary, plus damages if they contested in arbitration." "Correct," I said. "And Karen signed the implementation memo in December. I have the PDF with metadata, timestamped, notarized, and backed up in 3 locations." Aaron exhaled quietly. "They thought terminating you one day early would eliminate the payout." It didn't. They assume termination cancels obligation, but the clause activates because of the termination. "This is going to cause serious problems upstairs," he said under his breath. "I'm not here for revenge," I replied. "I'm here for enforcement." He nodded thoughtfully. "Do you want this escalated to lead counsel?" "I'd prefer it come from you at first and quietly. You have relationships I don't. I'd rather this unfold internally, not turn into a public spectacle." Aaron said little after that. He photographed the page, scanned the folder, and emailed himself the annotated packet. As I stood to leave, I added, "Don't worry about being on the wrong side. The wrong side assumed I wouldn't respond." Outside his office, I didn't head to the garage yet. I had one more stop. Passing the pantry on 43, I noticed 2 interns whispering over iced coffees, eyes wide. News travels quickly when leadership shifts. In the elevator, I studied my reflection in the steel, straightened my hair, adjusted my collar, and took a steady breath. They believed they had ended this. They hadn't. I had documentation and their signatures. Within 24 hours, those signatures would cost them more than they expected. The legal floor carried its usual scent of printer toner and overworked ambition. Framed photos of past general counsels, square-jawed men in expensive suits, lined the walls. I found Sarah exactly where I expected, focused on her monitor inside a cubicle far too small for the knowledge she carried. Sarah remembered everything: case law, birthdays, even my cat's name. She had been the first intern I mentored back when she relied on sticky notes and believed HR protected employees. 5 years later, she understood the system better. Today would reinforce that lesson. She looked up, startled. "Victoria, what are you doing here? I just heard." "You heard correctly," I said, placing the folder in front of her. Clause 11C annotated. Original contract addendums, signatures, arbitration triggers. It also references the equity schedule Brian approved in Q4. She blinked. "You were terminated?" "Effective immediately. No cause cited, 1 day before vesting." Sarah opened the folder cautiously. "Did Karen sign off on this?" She did. Page 6 of the implementation memo, DocuSign from her iPad, timestamps in the margin. She scanned the language. "The clause activates upon involuntary termination without cause within 24 hours of a major equity event, including scheduled vesting." "I didn't hide it," I said. "I highlighted it." Brian laughed and said, "Only lawyers read fine print." Sarah paused on page 3, reread a paragraph more slowly, and looked up. "This triggers an accelerated payout equal to double the equity value, plus base salary, benefits continuation, and indemnity if they contest it." "Yes." Her expression shifted between disbelief and admiration. They thought they were being strategic. They assumed I wouldn't notice a last-minute termination without legal review or compliance documentation. They were mistaken. "Does Aaron know?" "He's escalating to lead counsel quietly, but an additional review won't hurt." She nodded, absorbing the implications. This language is precise. I drafted it while recovering from pneumonia, I said. Signed it from a hospital bed. I was planning ahead. She gave a restrained smile. This should go to Meredith. It should. As I turned to leave, she asked, what if they try to bury it? They can attempt to, I said. It's backed up in 3 locations. One with Aaron, one in my personal legal archive, and one stored in a drive that automatically emails the full packet to the board if my employment record is altered without the matching clause reference. Her eyes widened. You're serious? I prepare thoroughly, I replied. It's effective when no one expects it. I left the legal floor without interruption. No one stopped me. That's the nature of quiet exits. People interpret composure as surrender. It wasn't. Meanwhile, Karen entered the HR conference room, visibly unsettled. She placed her laptop on the table and said sharply, "We need documentation immediately." "Documentation of what?" Shell from HR asked. "Victoria's termination, a waiver, a write-up, an incident log, anything." Shell scrolled through files. There are no formal warnings, no coaching notes. Her record is clean. "There must be something," Karen insisted. She left too calmly. "Legal is—" She stopped herself. "Legal is what?" Shell asked. "Nothing. Just keep searching." Downstairs in compliance, the review had already begun. Sarah passed the folder to Meredith, the board's lead counsel. Meredith read it once, then requested a discreet but immediate examination of my employment history, contract amendments, and compensation triggers. Karen, meanwhile, was calling department heads. "Jerry, I need every email related to Victoria's Q4 renegotiation. Contracts, approvals, equity schedules, everything." She paused. "Archived? Then unarchive it." At the same time, I packed my office methodically. No rush, no visible frustration. I unplugged my docking station, folded my sweaters neatly, and placed my old Rolodex into my leather tote. On my desk was a photo of my mother and me from 10 years ago, celebrating the day I received the Archer offer. "Be so good they have to notice," she had said. They noticed, just later than expected. Back in the HR conference room, Meredith stood behind Karen, who was scribbling notes as if documentation could reverse the timeline. "Karen," Meredith said evenly. Karen looked up. "Yes?" Meredith held up the packet. "Is this your signature on page 6 of the implementation memo?" Karen hesitated. "Yes, but I didn't review every amendment. Brian said we needed her retained through Q4. "And you initialed each page?" "Yes. We were finalizing headcount projections." Meredith tapped the document. "Clause 11C triggers a payout that doubles the standard equity incentive if an executive is terminated without cause within 24 hours of a major equity event." "Wait," Shell said from across the room. "She was due to vest tomorrow." "Exactly," Meredith replied. "You terminated her today." The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. "Technically," Meredith continued, "this wasn't simply mishandled. It was catastrophic. Her contract is enforceable. She formally notified us of the clause. We have a timestamp confirming receipt. That detail makes this significantly worse." Karen sat down abruptly. "We were trying to save the company $4 million, she said quietly. "You may have exposed it to 6. Possibly more," Meredith responded evenly. Around the same time, a calendar invite appeared on the board chair's assistance screen. Subject: Urgent. Victoria Owens Equity Clause Review. Priority: Highest. Sender: Lead Counsel. Upstairs, Victoria closed her bag and looked around her office one last time. The room seemed smaller now, as if it understood something had shifted. She walked out carrying only her tote, heels steady against the tile floor. She passed framed employee awards and glass cases filled with innovation trophies. At the elevator, a new marketing hire stood waiting. "Victoria, is it true they let you go?" he asked hesitantly. "That's the rumor," she replied calmly. "But you were the department." She gave a slight shrug. "Then they're about to see what it's like without it." The elevator doors opened. As she stepped inside, she added, "If anyone asks, tell them to read Clause 11C." The doors closed, and the consequences began to unfold. Victoria sat at a quiet corner table in a cafe 4 blocks from Arctran headquarters. It was one of those modern spaces with reclaimed wood furniture and carefully sourced coffee. She wasn't there for the atmosphere. She needed Wi-Fi, a clear view of the entrance, and distance from the building. Her phone buzzed. From Meredith Liu, Lead Board Counsel. Subject: Clause 11C, acknowledged. Time: 10:41 a.m. Victoria, we are reviewing your termination file and contract. Clause 11C documentation received. Timestamp confirmed. We will advise shortly. No apology, no pleasantries, just precise legal language. That tone confirmed they understood she wasn't speculating. She opened her encrypted backup application. 3 identical copies of her contract were stored there, fully annotated. Every signature from Brian, Karen, and 2 compensation committee members was logged and timestamped. She even retained a screen recording of the Zoom meeting approving the equity plan, including Brian saying, "Whatever legal wants, just keep her through year end." On the 44th floor of ArcTran headquarters, Meredith placed the packet on the conference table. Brian picked it up casually. "This again? She's bluffing." "She isn't bluffing," Meredith said. "She's enforcing." Karen stood in the corner, arms crossed tightly. "But we already terminated her." "You didn't void the bonus," Meredith corrected. "You activated it. The clause clearly states that termination without documented cause within 24 hours of a scheduled vesting triggers accelerated payout terms." Brian frowned. "We did it before it vested." "That is precisely the issue. The 24-hour window protects against last-minute actions. You initialed that language yourself. Page 4, lower right corner, time-stamped February 19th during the Q4 board session." Brian's expression shifted. "No one reads all of that. I assumed legal was being thorough." "We were," Meredith replied. He flipped through the pages and visibly reacted. "She submitted this to Aaron Patel and Sarah Clark within 90 minutes of leaving. There's a digital record showing she notified internal legal channels before your department even processed her exit memo." Karen exhaled sharply. "She was planning this." "She was planning not to be denied what she earned," Meredith responded. "That's not the same thing." Back at the cafe, Victoria leaned back in her chair. The feeling wasn't dramatic. It was confirmation. The moment before acknowledgement becomes unavoidable. Her phone buzzed again. From Sarah Clark. Subject, clause language circulating. Time, 11:07 a.m. "Meredith has forwarded your file to the Compensation Committee and External Counsel. Things are moving quickly. Not everyone is pleased. Stay alert." Victoria replied briefly. "Understood. Inform me if any retroactive amendments are attempted. I maintain version history on all documents." She closed her email and opened a crossword puzzle app, filling in a 7-letter answer for poetic justice. Inside ArcTran, Brian paced. "What's the exposure?" Meredith consulted her notes. Standard payout was $4 million. Clause 11C applies a multiplier to unvested equity, adds penalty provisions for termination without cause, and includes arbitration damages. Estimated. Approximately $6.5 million, she said calmly, assuming she does not pursue further claims. Brian turned toward Karen. "You said this would save money." "It was supposed to," she answered quietly. After a pause, Brian said, "Offer a settlement. Half. Include an NDA." "She hasn't requested settlement," Meredith replied. "She hasn't requested mediation. She submitted the clause, timestamps, and signature chain. Nothing more." Karen swallowed. "Then what does she want?" That was the point. She hadn't asked for anything because she didn't need to. The conference room doors closed. Meredith stood at the head of the table, composed and direct. Brian, Karen, and the Compensation Committee sat in silence. "Let's be clear," Meredith began, placing printed documents on the table. "This is not an HR oversight. It is a contractual liability we created." Brian leaned back. "She's escalating unnecessarily." "She is enforcing a binding agreement," Meredith replied firmly. "And this is not exaggeration. It is exposure." She slid page 6 toward Karen. "Your signature." "I didn't review every line," Karen said. "You initialed every page," Meredith responded. "Including Clause 11C, the activation multiplier, the vesting window language, and the constructive termination trigger." "Constructive termination?" Brian asked. "It means termination under circumstances designed to avoid fulfilling a contractual obligation," Meredith explained. "Legally, that is equivalent to terminating someone because of that obligation." The room remained silent as the implication settled. Karen's face drained of color. "We terminated her due to restructuring. We never referenced the bonus." "That's exactly the issue," Meredith replied. "There's no documented cause, no performance concerns, no disciplinary record, no formal redundancy justification filed with HR. We escorted her out 23 hours before a scheduled equity vest and assumed that would eliminate the payout. Instead, it activated every financial safeguard she built into that clause. She addressed the room directly. This was not simply an error. It was a $6.5 million trigger executed with overconfidence. A committee member cleared his throat. Is it enforceable? It is fully enforceable, Meredith said. She has timestamps, backups, email records, and metadata. Her termination was processed internally 37 minutes after she submitted the clause to legal and compliance. That timing creates both legal and public exposure for retaliation. Brian muttered and pushed his chair back slightly. Sit down, Meredith said firmly. He paused. She walked to the touchscreen display and brought up the original equity agreement, digitally signed and archived. She zoomed in on Clause 11C. In the event of involuntary or constructive termination within 24 hours preceding a scheduled equity vesting event, the subject shall be entitled to full vesting acceleration, immediate payout at current market value, and additional compensation calculated at 1.5 times base salary. Arbitration may be waived at the employee's sole discretion. The room went quiet. Who approved that? Someone asked. Meredith enlarged the signature line. Board Chair Lawrence Drayton. Brian looked stunned. Lawrence signed this? He did, Meredith confirmed. In 2019, prior to closing Series B, Victoria drafted the clause as retention protection. Lawrence agreed it was reasonable given her role in building our early compliance framework. It remained in place for 3 years. Karen spoke softly. Why didn't we catch it? Because you didn't read carefully, Meredith replied evenly. You focused on headlines and summaries. She focused on details. The clause was written in plain language, initialed by you. The committee shifted uneasily. Is there a solution? Someone asked. There is no clean solution, Meredith answered. If we settle now, it suggests fault. If we litigate, we lose. If we delay, she can escalate directly to the board. If we attempt retroactive justification, she holds version control data on every relevant document, including executive edits. She anticipated this. Brian leaned back. What does she want? She hasn't asked for anything, Meredith said. That's what you're missing. She doesn't need to. Just after noon, Victoria sat in the rooftop garden of her condo building. Her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but the origin was obvious. Victoria Owens, she answered calmly. Victoria, this is David Halpern, the voice said, from the board. She recognized the tone immediately. David had once discreetly offered her a position at a competing firm. He understood power dynamics. David, she replied, how can I help? Did you intend to trigger Clause 11C? They terminated me, she said evenly. I ensured documentation was preserved. A pause followed. I've reviewed the clause, he said. The annotations and timestamps are thorough. It's one of the most comprehensive risk protections I've seen in an incentive agreement. I've had strong mentors, she replied. Some of them on your board. A quiet exhale. Brian insists it was an oversight. I'm sure he does. Karen claims she didn't understand the multiplier. She signed it twice and circulated it for approval, Victoria responded. In her December 14th memo, the clause language was bolded and underlined. Her initials appear in the margin with full metadata. Another pause. A second voice spoke in the background. The equity ratio multiplier applies. Recalculation shows approximately 6.4 million, possibly higher depending on market value at termination. David returned to the line. Our CFO confirmed it. With the unvested equity component and 1.5x multiplier, the payout exceeds 6 million. Victoria watched a pigeon cross the railing before answering. You're not calling to debate numbers. You're assessing impact. I am, David admitted. Karen is under pressure. Brian is distancing himself. Meredith is considering settlement, but you haven't responded. No counteroffer, no statement, no counsel appearance. Why? Because I don't need to, she said. I followed the contract. I drafted the contract. They chose to ignore it. They may request arbitration. They can request it. The clause gives me sole discretion to decline. Litigation? They would lose. The documentation is comprehensive. He was quiet for a moment. You were always composed. I see now that composure wasn't restraint. It was preparation. That's why they hired me, she said, and why terminating me without review was short-sighted. I assume you'll involve outside counsel. I already did, she replied, 3 years ago when the clause was written. The call ended. She looked up at the sky, expression unchanged. The 6 million was secondary. The principle was accuracy. They believed they could remove the foundation without consequence. They were mistaken. Back at headquarters, the executive suite was silent. Leadership had been assembled without agenda. Brian sat rigid at the head of the table. Karen appeared visibly unsettled. The CFO was pale. HR looked overwhelmed. Meredith entered with the packet in hand and placed it firmly on the table. The review was no longer theoretical. It was operational. "You've all read Clause 11C," she began, "but allow me to read it aloud one final time so there is no confusion about what has just happened." She didn't wait for approval. In the event of involuntary or constructive termination within 24 hours before a scheduled equity vesting event, the subject is entitled to full equity acceleration, compensation equal to 1.5 times base salary, and related damages calculated under the pre-approved performance incentive plan. The employer waives arbitration in cases of clear bad faith dismissal. She closed the file, removed her glasses with measured calm, and turned to Brian. Her voice was low, slightly unsteady. "Brian, please tell me you paid her." He blinked. "Excuse me?" Meredith straightened. "Tell me right now that you issued her the bonus before the termination was processed." He shifted in his chair. "We terminated her before it vested. That was the strategy." The room fell silent. "Jesus Christ," Meredith whispered. He raised his hand slightly. "If we let her go before the bonus vests, we don't have to pay it. That's standard practice. Everyone knows that." "No," Meredith snapped, sharp enough to make Karen flinch. "That's how you believe it works. That clause wasn't drafted to avoid payment. It was written to protect the employee from exactly that move." The CFO looked up, eyes tense. "You've already received a notice of intent to collect damages. It came in 2 hours ago." Her counsel submitted a certified statement with supporting files, timestamps, internal emails, everything. Brian scoffed. "So what?" "We counter. Offer half." "No," Meredith said firmly. "You don't negotiate with someone holding a loaded contract and leverage in the other hand. She doesn't need to argue. She just has to wait. And right now, the board wants to know why you approved a termination without legal review or documented cause during a protected clause window." Brian's confidence began to fade. "Fine, then we pay the bonus. Worst case, $4 million. Meredith turned to the CFO. "Tell him." The CFO's expression was grim. "With the equity recalculations, performance triggers, and the multiplier clause." "Multiplier?" Karen whispered. The CFO nodded. "It's not $4 million. It's 6.5, and that's before damages." Brian leaned back as if struck. "That can't be serious." She also submitted the Q4 meeting transcript where you dismissed her clause concerns on record, Meredith added. "We're dealing with a paper trail that could not be clearer." Brian looked around the room, realizing no one was stepping in to defend him. The VP of Operations cleared his throat. "What happens now?" Meredith drew a slow breath. "Now the board reviews the breach. They will likely authorize a full payout to Victoria and initiate a vote on restitution. If they determine it was malicious," she said, locking eyes with Brian, "they may hold you personally liable." Karen looked pale. HR quietly gathered her files. The CFO pressed his fingers to his temples. Brian finally spoke again. "She planned this. She set us up." Meredith's eyes narrowed. "She protected herself. And you walked directly into the risk she warned you about. She didn't conceal it. You simply never read it." Silence settled again, heavier than before. Then the board secretary opened the door, hesitant. "Apologies. The chair is requesting your presence. All of you, immediately." Meredith didn't hesitate. She turned to Brian one last time. "This wasn't an accident. It was a masterclass, and you failed every stage." She gathered the contract packet and walked out without waiting. Brian stayed seated. Karen held her breath. The danger was no longer theoretical. It was inside the room. Across town, the skyline outside Victoria's Austin hotel room reflected glass, cranes, and ambition. She stood barefoot on the balcony in a robe that cost more than her first apartment. Phone in one hand, a chilled floral drink in the other. A notification appeared in her inbox. Subject settlement package, Archer and Financial, external counsel on behalf of the board of directors. Attachment, final settlement agreement. Payment confirmation, $6,586. Note, please review and return signed NDA within 5 business days. No public disclosure without express board consent. She didn't open the NDA. She didn't need to. The numbers were confirmed. The payment had cleared. The consequences were already unfolding. Her former company hadn't issued a press release. No bold restructuring announcement. Just a quiet exit framed as internal adjustment. Karen had resigned to pursue new opportunities, a phrase everyone understood. As for Brian, he was reassigned. That was the official term. Rumor suggested he was now leading innovation initiatives in a newly created department with no defined budget or office. An old team member leaked a photo of his new badge, Executive Liaison, Internal Alignment. In practice, it meant removal without spectacle. Victoria didn't return the voicemails. Not Meredith's, not Sarah's, not even David Halpern's late offer to connect her with advisory boards. She didn't need introductions. She already had signed agreements. She was meeting with the executive team at Westridge Capital, who had flown her in after hearing how she leveraged a single clause to hold leadership accountable. They weren't offering her a position. They were offering a seat at the table. Partner track, strategy division, autonomy, equity, authority. But tonight wasn't about contracts. It was about closure. She sat by the rooftop pool, stretched out, and took a photo. Sand-colored tile beneath her feet. A drink with an exaggerated garnish beside her. The city behind her shimmered like a polished apology. She opened her messages and found the board chair's number. She typed one sentence, Clause 11C, line 22. She attached the photo, no caption, no emoji, just the reference. Line 22 contained the final statement she had personally revised after 2 late-night calls with legal. Failure to honor the terms herein shall constitute not only breach, but a systemic lapse in judgment subject to restitution, review, and reputational consequence. They had initialed it. Brian had even laughed at the wording. Now the clause had unfolded exactly as written. She pressed send, watched the screen dim, took another sip, and for the first time in years felt something steady. Not revenge, not triumph. Just clarity. She hadn't destroyed the bridge. She had walked away with ownership, sold the ground beneath it, and required payment for what remained. Big thanks for watching.